Make Dan Ben David a co-host as well as myself.
Yes, thank you, Les. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Israel Dialogues. It's a pleasure to have you all with us. The recording should have just kicked in. And we have a very exciting program coming up this year. This winter, we have a variety of really exciting guests and visitors. And of course, we also have several new people joining our panel. It's a pleasure to welcome Norm Mogul. It's a pleasure to welcome Shai Menuchin to the rotating panel and to extend our appreciation to our past panelists who may yet return to us at different moments in time. We're excited to see them when they have the opportunity. As always, when we begin these programs and when we begin this new semester, um, we turn our thoughts to the people we wish were here. Dr. Howard is his energy is still with us when we think about this moment and this time. We're inspired by his work. And we continue this process in honor of him in many ways. So as we say, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek, as we go from previous panelists being with us and to new panelists joining us, it's an exciting moment for the future of the Israel Dialogues program. For those of you who are, one moment, please.
He has a little daughter, and I expect she has intervened.
She always wants the limelight.
So for those of you who are in the Greater Toronto area or are joining us live at this moment, all you have to do is look outside to see the heavy snow. I am at home, of course, with my family and with my 5-year-old daughter, who is doing her best not to make noise in the background. But I could hear it, which means I know you could hear it, and I've attempted to fix that. So, having said that, and danced on the head of a pin for an extra moment and a half, a little bit of humanness, I'm going to hand it over to David to welcome everyone and introduce our guests today.
Thanks, Rabbi Kay. Very good to see everyone. And thank you for reminding everyone that when we began the Israel Dialogues in April 2021, it was with our departed friend and colleague, Howard Edelman, who he and I um, initiated this, and then we're fortunate to be joined by so many others who brought their expertise and caring to this program. Uh, Today, we really are very fortunate to have with us Professor Danny Ben-David, who is a professor of economics at Tel Aviv University and the founder and president of the Shoresh Institute for Socioeconomic Research. Many of you will have read our articles or listened to webinars or podcasts uh, that involve Danny, uh, and he's made an important mark not only as an internationally recognized economist, but in the role that he and his colleagues at the Shoresh Institute for Socioeconomic Research play in the public life of Israel and in trying to affect and inform and ultimately perhaps even shape Israeli public policy. And it's obviously an incredibly important time to be involved in those spheres of activity, um, not just in Israel, but in any democracy at a time that liberal democracy um, seems to be under challenge. So, with that, let me invite Professor Danny Ben David, who's session is titled Israel's Moment of Truth. That I think opens up many avenues for consideration and concern. So, Danny, the screen is yours. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. Um, I appreciate it. It's wonderful to be with our friends in Toronto. You have snow, we have sunlight, a lot of blue skies, or actually dark skies right now, but in general, very chilly today. I think it was like 18 or 19 degrees Celsius. So, um,
Well, it's the minus 18 or 19 Celsius here today.
yeah. So if we could just all get along, it would be great because we have the best weather in the world. Um, let me begin by telling you a little bit about myself and about Shoish and why we do what we do. Um, like David said, I'm a macroeconomist at Tel Aviv University. My area of specialization is economic growth, the analysis of long-run trends and what determines them. And it's through those visors that I happen to look pretty much by coincidence at the Israeli data in 1999, so it's 27 years ago now. And it changed my life. It was uh, as someone who just read newspapers about Israel's economy but didn't really deal with it. I saw that we are on trajectories that are simply unsustainable with all that that implies for a country in the region that Israel is in. It makes it an existential issue. Um, just to give you a sense of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to highlight it, but today already we are at the point where roughly half the children in Israel are receiving a third world education, and they belong to the fastest growing parts of the population, which means that when these kids grow up, they won't be able to maintain a first world economy, which means that they won't be able to maintain or support first world healthcare or welfare. But what makes Israel particularly special in this case, they won't be able to support a first world army, which means, given some of the neighbors that we have and their inclinations on what to do with us, and sometimes their attempts to carry that out, the question is who's going to be defending Israel in 20, 30 years when our kids and grandchildren grow up? And will they have the capacity to deal with it? It's far from a given that that will be the case, given the trajectory that we're on. So 11 years ago, Professor Eyal Kimchi, he's my colleague from the Hebrew University, I'm from Tel Aviv University. We established the Shoish Institution. Shoish means root in Hebrew. The idea is to focus on the root determinants of our growth path, of where we're headed. What can we do about it? What are the implications? How fast are we heading to where we're heading? And to try and do what we can to bring this information to Israel's top policymakers, be they right wing, left wing, religious, secular, Jews, Arabs, it doesn't matter. We try to reach everyone and anyone who's willing to listen. And it's basically a race against time at this point. Um, I believe that the elections that we are due to have sometime this year before November will probably be the most important elections in our history because we've pretty much reached the point of no return. There are things that we need to do that if we don't do them now, it'll be too late to do them in the future. So without further ado, let me try to show you a little bit of the things that we're working on. I should point out, let me first of all find what I want to show you.
While you're doing that, let me remind our viewers that they should send in comments or questions to the Q&A.
All right. Um, so hopefully you see on the screen now the lead slide.
Yes.
Yes.
All right,
Yeah, it's clear.
good. Hold on, so that I'll be able to see you on the side screen here, or at least those of you who I can see. I'll put on the side screen here. All right. Everything I'm going to show you is on our website. It's listed below here, www.shorish.institute. And of course, if you're interested, I'll be happy to send you a copy of the talk of the presentation afterwards. Just send me an email. I'll be happy to do it. So Israel is actually a study in irony. On the one hand, we have one of the most resilient countries in the world. It's resilient not just in our attitude, we're pretty resilient economically. And I want to give you a few examples of this. When we look at the two of the biggest events that occurred recently worldwide, economic events, one was the Great Recession. If we look at 3 years after the beginning of it, it began in 2008. So if we look at 2010 and compare to the year prior, 2007, GDP per capita is a common measure of living standards. And you can see that very few countries, 3 years after this began, had reached the point that they were at before it began. We not only reached it, we actually had incomes that were 4% higher. If we look at COVID, another example, if you look at 3 years afterwards, 2022, relative to the year prior, 2019, in this case, most of the OECD countries did better, and we were among those who did the best. If we look at Israel internally now, we had basically the three worst years in our history. And when we look at GDP per capita, 2023, when the war began, GDP per capita living standards barely rose. In 2024, they actually fell. And then the first 3 quarters of last year, of 2025, when we compare them to the first 3 quarters of 2024, we improved. We are 1%, 1.2% higher. And in fact, if we do a similar thing that we did earlier, look at the first 3 quarters of 2025 to the first 3 quarters of the year prior to 2023, prior to the war and to the judicial coup and so on, you can see that we basically recovered. We're not doing much better, but at least we're not doing worse than we were in that period then. So these are incomplete data for 2025, but still first 3 quarters. If we look at imports and exports in Israel, in the pits in 2023, 2024, major improvement in the first 3 quarters of 2025. And again, if we look at imports and exports in the first 3 quarters of 2025 relative to the year prior to when all this mess broke out, we're actually still doing worse. So we're on the road to recovery, but not quite there yet. And finally, if we look at one of the major types of investments, foreign direct investment or FDI, net in terms, we invest abroad, people invest in Israel. So we invest abroad less than people invest in Israel. People invest in Israel more than abroad. But in general, this really fell in 2023 and 2024 and picked up in a big way in the first 3 quarters of 2025. And yet we're not yet where we were prior to all this. So we have this ability to rebound, but, and that's the big but, on the other hand, and there is another hand, we're looking at a major problem, and that is the underlying sources of our growth, basically. So I'm going to outline the issues that I'm going to talk about here. First of all, we're very, very dependent on a very small and very skilled workforce, which begs the question, so why are so few people in Israel skilled enough to be shouldering the burden? One of the issues that is a big issue these days is the core curriculum. It's commonly tossed about in the sense of the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox Jews, but it's a bigger question than that. Who needs it in general? I'm going to discuss that. Talk about the demographic direction, because economics, demographics are not separate. They go together here. And we'll also look at some of the towns that have become more and more Haredi very, very quickly, and get a glimpse basically at what would happen to Israel if it starts to resemble these towns. To the extent that these issues are beginning to trouble Israelis, we see an increasing number of Israelis leaving. Still, no tidal wave here, very small numbers, but a concern. So I'm going to talk about that. But I don't want to leave you with just the problems. There is a way to fix them. The problem is that this fix is a can we've been kicking down the road for decades. We all know the problems, at least at the level of headlines, but no one really wants to deal with the big issues. So we're going to show you the main points, a 4-point roadmap that we've actually tried to bring to the attention of people who want to lead Israel. So I'll discuss that later. Let's begin with basically a very strong and growing dependence on a limited workforce. How much so? Well, what determines our income, our wages, is called productivity, labor productivity. And you can see that we do have a sector that is super, super strong, high tech. The productivity there is 25% above the OECD. Here's the catch. Only 10% of Israel's workforce is in high tech. Everybody else, 90% of the workforce, is producing at 40% below the OECD average. The OECD is the family of developed nations. You saw the list earlier. It includes countries that aren't developed, but the vast majority are. All of the developed countries are in the OECD. That's kind of our benchmark here. And you can see that a huge chunk of Israel, 90% of the workers, are producing way, way, way below the OECD, which means the country on average, despite having a startup nation as part of it, is not doing that well. When we talk about taxes, one of the biggest components of our income, of our tax revenue, is income tax. And as you can see here, the share of total income tax revenue coming from just the top 2 income deciles, 20% of the population today in Israel pay 93% of all the income tax, and that's gradually increasing. It rose by 10 points over the past 25 years. And we're talking about, say, the 9th income deciles. The average gross income is 24,000 shekels a month, which is, depending on the exchange rate, somewhere between $7,000 and $8,000 a month. This is the average for the 9th income decile. So you see, we're not talking about just about the very rich. We're talking about many people who are basically middle class. Half of the people in Israel are so poor, they don't make it to the bottom rung of the income tax ladder. And as such, they pay no income tax, half. We need them. And then we have the remaining income decile, 6 to 8. Their share in the total has fallen by 10 percentage points. It's fallen by 2/3, in fact. We spoke about high techs. I want to highlight this a little bit more. That 10% of the workforce is responsible for half of all of our exports, 20% of our GDP, but half of our exports. And by the way, not everyone in high tech is in a high tech occupation. We have cooks, drivers, secretaries, and so on. So in fact, only 6% of the workforce is actually in a high tech occupation in high tech. When we talk about healthcare, we have a very large healthcare sector in Israel. The people who basically determine the quality of healthcare are the physicians. How many do we have relative to the adult 25 and up population in Israel? It's just 0.5% or 0.6%. Who teaches the physicians and the engineers and the computer scientists? That happens at our research universities. How many faculty do we have at the total in the research universities relative to our adult population? That's just 0.2%. In other words, Israel this past year has eclipsed the 10 million population. But you don't need 1 million or 2 to get up and leave for the country to be in a big mess. These three groups together, the high-tech guys, the physicians, and the senior faculty at the universities, these guys, the high-tech, keep our nose in the developed world economically. The physicians give us healthcare that is at developed world levels. And the universities are the ones who basically provide the knowledge at developed world levels. That's less than 300,000 people. And if a critical mass of that group decides that we do not have a future here, that too much of a burden is on them, that they're carrying too much of it, and decide to leave, we're going to be in a heap of trouble. So that's just to give you a little bit of perspective, what it means to have very, very narrow shoulders, basically keeping us in the developed world. Which begs the question then, so why? How come so few individuals in Israel? After all, we do have good universities. Why do we have so few skilled individuals shouldering the burden? Well, part of the problem when people look at data is they don't look at the right data. For example, when we look at the share of individuals with an academic degree, we're stars. The average share of Israelis with an academic degree is higher than the vast majority of OECD countries. The problem is that many of these degrees aren't worth the paper they're written on. I'm not going to go into that directly, but I'm going to show you this in a different way a little bit. Another way of looking at education is just to count the number of years of schooling per person among adults, for example. And here you can see Israel has one of the most educated populations, at least in terms of the number of years of schooling. But here's the catch. One of the things that we know, it's not the years of education, it's the education in those years, to paraphrase Abraham Lincoln. What I'm going to show you here is data taken from David's alma mater, Stanford. Rick Hanushek is a Stanford economist. He's one of the leaders in this area of showing the relationship between education, quality of education, and economic growth. As this is one of his graphs, 50 countries over 40 years. And if we look at the relationship this time between education quantity, in a moment education quality, in this case years of schooling, you can see that the relationship is very soft. There's not much of a relationship here. There is a positive relationship, but a very, very soft one. But if we move out the quantity, the years of schooling, and talk about what the kids actually know, quality of education in core subjects. There are international exams on some of these core subjects in math, science, and reading. And what Hanushek and his co-authors found is that this is where we have a very strong relationship. Now, I'm showing you a relationship. I'm not showing you causality. They do show causality. I'm going to show you a little bit of causality at the micro level in a moment, but that's what matters. It's what you know that determines whether you're going to do well personally and whether your country's going to do well nationally. So what is the level of education in Israel in math, science, and reading? This is what I'm going to show you now is the average for all of the OECD countries over the past 2 decades in all of these PISA exams that were given. And you can see that Israel has one of the worst performing countries. Canada, your country, way up there, number 4 in the past 20 years. We are basically at the bottom of the developed world. The countries below us are pretty much not developed. One can argue about Greece, but Turkey, Chile, Mexico, Colombia are not exactly the countries that we're aspiring to look like. But here's the thing. These countries are preparing their kids to compete with one another when they grow up. And so are we. And this is the preparation we're giving. I should point out that this picture of where Israel is actually incorrect, because the Haredim don't teach, they deprive their children of these studies, of their basic, the boys. The boys don't study this material, so they don't take the exam. Had they taken the exam, it would be worse at the national level. This is bad enough. And we have this inclination to blame everything on the Haredim or the Arabs, depending on who's doing the blaming. Well, not so fast. The Haredim aren't responsible for this. We'll talk about the Haredim separately. We have basically 4 education streams. The Haredi stream, which we'll put aside, the secular Jewish, the religious Jewish, religious non-Haredi, and the Arab-speaking stream. The top of our education system are the secular Jewish schools, which are really crummy. They're below the majority of OECD countries, below 57% of the OECD countries. The religious schools, again, religious non-Haredi, they're below 80% of the OECD countries. And then we have the Arab kids in Israel, or the Arab speakers in Israel, and their average is below many developing countries, but many third world countries. In fact, if we compare our Arab-speaking kids who are Israeli, they're our kids, but compare them to kids in Arab countries that participate in this exam, 6 Arab countries participated. Our kids are below half of them. If we were to do something similar to this to the US, divide the US up into 4 groups, the whites, blacks, Asians, and Hispanics, this is what it would look like. So you can see that a country that has a low average, the US is not doing so well here as a country, but there are groups at least that are at the top of the developed world. The Asians are off this chart. Whites are doing very well. Way, way down are the Hispanics, who are doing actually better than Israel. Below Israel are the blacks, who are doing way better than the Arabs, and the Arabs are doing better in Israel. The Israeli Arabs are doing much better than the Haredi boys. So this is just to give you a sense of where we're headed and what we're doing with the kids. So this year in school, in first grade, this is the breakup for first grade. 23%, nearly a quarter of the kids in first grade are Arab kids. And on average, obviously not all of them, but on average, they score below many, many developing countries. The Haredim are 24%. The boys don't even study the material. And then we have in Israel what we call the periphery, the geographic periphery, the social periphery. A lot of kids who are basically getting also an education below many third world countries. And that's what I meant before I began to talk. Roughly half the children today in Israel are receiving a third world education. They belong to the fastest growing parts of the population, which means that this is basically untenable as we move ahead. So let's talk a bit about what needs to be taught, okay? So when we talk about a core curriculum, we can actually measure some of the things that need to be included in the core, not everything, obviously. What we did is the following. Every Israeli who is born is given an ID number. We have this ID number throughout our life. What we at Shoish did was we commissioned the Central Bureau of Statistics in Israel to build us a special data set. The Central Bureau of Statistics can take those ID numbers and find out what you studied in school, at what level, what your grades were. Did you go to college? What did you study? What were your grades? As adults, where did you work? What did you earn? Who are your parents? Are they educated? What kind of an education? How many siblings? Did you grow up in the periphery, in the center, and so on? In other words, for every single person born in Israel, this isn't a sample, this is everybody born in Israel over a multi-year period, we have 100 different traits or classifications that we can use that basically affect future wages. All of this, in this particular case I'm going to show you here, is to to net out the effects of college and so on. And look, does it even matter what I study in high school? Okay. So what I'm going to show you here is from a study done by Eyal, my colleague at Shoish. One of the areas that came out statistically significant that increased future wages is English. And this was a study looking at boys and girls separately. One of the things that Eyal found is the benchmark here is who did not take English at all or took it at lower than 3 units. 5 units in Israel is the highest, 4 is below, and on down. So the boys who studied English at 3 units or up, it didn't really matter even the level, they're getting an increment of 2.4% in their future wages. The girls even get a higher increment. It's higher at 4 than at 3. For some reason, it's lower at 5 than at 4. Unclear why. put it aside. The other thing that matters is math. The higher the level of math, the higher the increase in wages. And this is girls who studied math and no science. No science. We'll add the science in a moment. For boys, the higher the level of math, the higher future wages. Now, if we start at girls who studied 4 units of math and start adding science, after all, STEM is something everybody talks about. We can actually separate it and see which kind of STEM gives you the biggest boost as adults in terms of wages. And you can see here that this boost is substantial for girls and also for boys. And if we talk about boys with 5 units of math and we add sciences, then the boost is big. And the big winner here are the kids who studied 5 units of math, 5 physics, and 5 computers. And in fact, the biggest winners are the girls, which means we also not only can have an idea which types of STEM actually give the biggest benefit afterwards in terms of compensation, we also learn here that policymakers need to try and explain to girls the importance of studying science, because girls, at least in Israel, study science a lot less than the boys, and they stand to benefit a lot from it, even more than the boys in this case. In fact, the few girls that actually do study science tend to study biology, which you can see down here. It gives the lowest boost. And in fact, at 5 units of math, it's not even statistically significant. So we kind of do know, at least in terms of economics, what are the things that schools should be focusing on. What about the Chavidim? Like I said earlier, they don't study, the boys don't study what they need to study, so we don't test them. There was an interesting study done at the Bank of Israel a few years ago that looked at towns and neighborhoods where Shas is one of Israel's 2 Haredi parties. It was a new party in the 90s, 80s, and 90s, and they opened up their own school system in the 90s. What this study did was it looked at the older boys in the family who went to regular non-Haredi schools and compared what happened to them to their siblings, the younger siblings who went to the Shas schools, the Haredi schools. They compared between neighborhoods and towns, statistically controlling for differences. This is what they found. The kids who went to the Shas, the Haredi schools, had 15% lower bagut. Bagut is basically high school graduation in Israel, matriculation, than their older brothers. Their employment rates were 14% lower, and their wages almost a fifth below the kids who basically lived in that same place and went to regular schools. So this was the contribution of the introduction of the Haredi schools, at least the Shas ones. On the other hand, we see a large number of Israelis, Haredi Israelis, deciding nonetheless to go to higher education. They apply, and we can see that these numbers are actually increasing very nicely. But there are a few caveats here. One is that there are a lot more Haredim. So you can't just show absolute numbers of Haredim. Second, it's primarily women, men much less so. But both of these ignore the main point, which is that Israel, like every other developed country, forces parents to send kids to school. It's mandatory. You have to send your kid to school. You can't just leave him at home or have him work instead of going to school. And that's in Israel too. But every other developed country except Israel also says there's a certain minimum core requirement that you need to study. That core can vary from country to country. It can even vary within countries. But you can't just ignore it, except in Israel. And the Haredi boys, they don't study what they need, which means that even if they want later to go to college, their dropout rates are crazy. Even the girls' dropout rates. The girls were sure study everything that they need. Well, there is a problem here. The majority of girls drop out. The fact that you see on the graph, the underlying graph, a lot more going to college isn't enough. You have to actually complete your degree. And over 3/4 of the boys, the Haredi boys, don't complete it. And keep in mind, they're going to really crummy Haredi colleges. They're not going to the Technion in general. These are not dropout rates from Tel Aviv or Hebrew University. These are dropout rates from some really crummy colleges because even there, it's too much. You cannot overcome what you didn't study as a kid. It just doesn't happen. Only the geniuses or the very smart ones are able to overcome it. But those are the exceptions to the rule. The government needs to understand what the rule is and work accordingly. Therefore, what's relevant is not who attempts, but who actually gets a degree. If we look at prime working age Israelis, 35 to 54, and as a benchmark, I'll show you secular Jews. They have the highest share of people with academic degrees. Again, some of them are garbage degrees, but I won't go into that. More for women degrees than men, and it's rising. It's very similar to other countries. This is the story with the Haredim. Absolutely nothing. For the women, there was a little bit of an increase in recent years, although it seems to have plateaued. But for the men, absolutely nothing. They try, and it's like they just run straight into a wall. They cannot overcome what they didn't study as children. Even though their politicians say, from morning to night, we have better study habits than you. Within 1 year, we can learn everything you did in 12. Clearly, they can't. There's no shortcuts in life. And the sooner we understand it, the better. So where are we headed? Israel, demographically. These are the fertility rates of the different population groups in Israel. As you can see, the majority are around 2 kids per family. The secular Jews, 2. Traditional, the Masorti is just a little bit above, 2.4. Druze and Christian Arabs are just under 2 kids per family. Muslims are with 3, but it's like in a free fall for the past 20 years. 40 years ago, Muslims, Haredim, and Druze had roughly 6 children per family. And the Druze, as they became acclimated into Israeli society, there's still a ways to go in that department, but their fertility basically fell to that of secular Jews. Christian Arabs are much more highly educated than the Muslim Arabs in Israel, so their fertility rates reflect it. And the Muslims, there's a growing middle class that wants to give their kids a good education, despite what they receive in the public schools. So they send them to private schools, by tutors. That's expensive. So they're just having less and less children. So the 3 is like a stopping point, a point on their way down in terms of fertility. The religious Jews in Israel are roughly at 4 children per family for the past 45 years. And then we have the Haredim. The Haredim, who were not really in any coalition before 1977, they were here and there before, but since 77, they became the kingmakers between right and left. Right wing in Israel didn't want to work with the left, left wing didn't want to work with the right. So the Haredim went with whoever paid them the highest price. And that price meant A, staying out of their schools, B, they staying out of the army, and C, shoveling as much money as they could get their hands on in their direction. What that meant was that while in the late 70s, they had roughly 6 children per family, when the money started coming in, within 1 decade, the 80s, they added 1 full child per family. They went from 6 to 7 children per family. In the 90s, they added nearly another half child per family. They were close to 7.4 children per family. And then we had the second Intifada in the early 2000s. Money was flowing out of Israel. We were hemorrhaging money. We hit 5 shekels to the dollar, 4.99 in June 2002. Just for clarification, today it's 3.2, so it was way up there. We were really in danger of an economic collapse, and so we had to do something major. What Sharon, who was the prime minister then, did was he replaced his finance minister with a guy by the name of Benjamin Netanyahu, who was actually a very good finance minister. And one of the things that he did was, because money was flowing out, budgets, deficits were huge, the debt was climbing, he had to cut the budget all around, cut what was above the table, what we saw, and below the table, everything was cut. One of the side effects of that was that when the benefits reaching the Haredim were cut, they were really slashed. Their fertility fell by half a child within 6 years. And once the money started flowing in, it basically leveled out at about 6.5. In recent years, after COVID, all of the fertility rates have fallen a bit. And that's where we are, roughly speaking, with these numbers. What do these numbers mean? They basically mean that the share of Haredim in Israeli society, in the Israeli population, is literally doubling every 25 years. Every generation, their share is double the previous generation. That's an exponential function, which most people, unfortunately, in Israel do not understand the difference between an exponential function and we know it's growing, okay? So here, let me just give you an example here. Grandparents, 50 to 54 years old, they're only 6% of the population, Haredi grandparents. We don't have many adult Haredim. Their grandchildren, toddlers, 0 to 4 years old, they're already 26% of the toddler population. That isn't a forecast into the future. That's today. They've been born. These kids are born. They are in Israel. And tomorrow, they're in school. And the day after tomorrow, they're in the workforce and in the army, or they're not. And if they're not, what happens then? Who's going to be their physicians, not just ours? Who's going to be defending them? Who's going to be doing all of the things that need to be done here? And keep in mind, if it's every 25 years doubling, in just 25 years, we're headed towards half the toddlers in Israel are Haredim. That's 25 years from now. It's not going to happen. There's no way. You can't just extrapolate like that forever. Not going to happen. It's either going to be fixed, dealt with, which I'm going to talk about towards the end here, what we need to do, not just with regard to the Haredim, or not. If we're not going to deal with it, it's going to be a lot more than half the kids. We're looking at a situation that we need to deal with now. Why so? I want to give you an example of some towns that have become increasingly populated by the Haredim. The Central Bureau of Statistics classifies every single town and every single city in Israel by socio-economic indicators. 1 is the lowest, the poorest towns. 10 is the wealthiest towns. If we look at some of the large cities in Israel, Tel Aviv is relatively wealthy. It's not at 10, but at 8. Haifa, 1 classification below, very steady. Beersheba is very middle class. It's at 5 and very steady. But there's a city missing here. It's called our capital, Jerusalem. This is what happened to Jerusalem. And this is just within the past 30 years. The graph is actually 25 years. They fell by 3 classifications. So what I want to do now is share with you the results of the broader study. What we did was we looked at all 200 and some Israeli towns and cities. What happened to them over time? Some improved. Some remained the same, like you saw here, some of these cities, and some fell. Who fell the most and by how much? There were 4 towns in Israel that fell by 3 classification. 1, Jerusalem, that you see here. Another one is a town called Bet Shemesh. Arad is the 3rd one, and a town called Givat Ze'ev. What is the one thing that all 4 of these have in common is a rapidly increasing Haredi population, which I'm going to show you how rapid in a second. There are towns that were built in Israel to handle the fast Haredi growth, so they were built as Haredi towns. From the beginning, they're at the bottom, they're at 1. These other towns that are, we have an overflow. We can't build enough towns. We shouldn't build towns just for Haredim, which means the overflow goes into towns that are not Haredi towns. But what happens when they reach there is a collapse, because basically they're driving out the more educated and skilled people in those towns. So when we look at primary schools in Jerusalem, for example, the share of kids in the secular primary schools, just 3.5 decades ago, they were 1/3 of the kids. Now, single digits. Single digits is just 9%. Even the religious non-Haredi Jews have left or are leaving Jerusalem because nobody wants to live in a town that is very poor and that basically you're living with people that don't want you around and show it. So the distribution of children in primary schools in Jerusalem is 46% Haredi, a third Arab, which is basically East Jerusalem, and roughly a tenth is secular and religious. Let's look at the other three towns that I mentioned, Beit Shemesh, Arad, and Givat Zev. These are towns that are basically Jewish towns, and I'm going to show you the distribution of kids in the year 2000 and in the year 2024. We'll start with Beit Shemesh. In the year 2000, 36% of the kids in primary school were Haredim. Over a quarter, just a little over a quarter, were in the secular schools, secular Jewish schools, and the remainder were religious non-Haredim. Look what happened within just 25 years. Today, 85% of the kids in Beit Shemesh in primary schools are Haredim. They basically threw out the rest. And when I say threw out, I'm not saying that in a nice way. They literally threw out the rest. What happens is it's not like you have A, B, C, different population groups and everybody lives and lets live. If I'm used to driving on Shabbat, they'll throw rocks at me. Beit Shemesh was notorious for having them spit at girls that weren't dressed appropriately in terms of what they deemed appropriate. And basically, they literally drove out the popular. They have a major intolerance for anybody who's unlike them. Arad, this is in the year 2000, mainly a secular town. 3/4 of the kids there, secular, a fifth are Haredim. Take a look at how fast this process occurs. When they move in, it's not just the fertility, it's the intolerance to others. And basically, we went just in 25 years from 3/4 secular to just 1/4 secular and 2/3 Haredim. Givat Zev, the last case here, no Haredi kids in the year 2000. In fact, no Haredi kids in the year until 2010. This is primarily a secular town in the year 2000. In fact, until 2010. 77% are secular, 23%, the remainder, are religious. Look at what happened in just 15 years, from 2010 to 2024. 3/4 Haredim, 7% are in the secular, and a fifth, 19%, are religious, non-Haredi. But here's the deal. These towns have Israel to support them financially. Israel is shoveling a lot of money to support these towns because they can't support themselves. And Israel is defending them because they're not a part of defending Israel anymore. What happens when the demography in Israel starts to resemble the demography in these towns? Who will support us? Who will defend us? What will happen? And this is happening very, very quickly. It's happening so quickly that people are reaching decisions here, and we have a problem of immigration. When we look at the total number the most recent data on immigration is from the first 9 months of 2024, because we needed the first 9 months of 2025 to know, did they return to Israel, did they leave, and so on. So this is the first 9 months of every one of these years, so that we're looking at similar periods. The years preceding the judicial coup attempt and the war, 2009 and 2022, were very steady, but steady in a bad way. Many more Israelis left than returned, 60% more. And then came 2023. Now, 2023, again, is the first 9 months, which is just up to the war, prior to the war. The war was October 7th, so this is through September, just a judicial coup part, less Israelis returning. 2024 is already coup and war. And then when we look at the immigration, we have this. The share of people who left Israel is basically 4 times the share of Israelis who return. This is, in many respects, a misleading graph, because a large chunk of these people are people who were not born in Israel. They made Aliyah. They moved to Israel, became Israeli citizens, and left. And so what I'm going to do here is net them out, okay? We're going to look at the foreign-born immigrants and returnees and native-born Israeli immigrants and returnees, because the biggest chunk of those who left are actually foreign-born. So I want to net them out and show you what's happening with the native-born. In general, many more people who immigrated to Israel left afterwards, 85% more on average. When we look at the returnees, there was a fall in the judicial coup months, a big fall, fell by half during the war, the first 9 months of 2024. In terms of immigration, this is what it looked like. And the biggest jump was in 2023. So a little bit of words, a few words here about who are these foreign-born immigrants. This particular episode was primarily influenced by Jews who fled Russia and Ukraine because of the war. They went through Israel, picked up Israeli citizenship, and took off. It was like a way station. And that's inflating the numbers here in terms of people who left. And they particularly left in 2023. And it fell in 2024. So 7 times more people foreign-born left than returned to Israel in the first 9 months of 2024, which were war months. I want to focus now on native-born Israelis. These are the ones who concern me the most. They're a part of us. They know us. They lived here, grew up here. And in general, they are leaving. Again, on the stable months prior to 2023, in an average year, 43% more native-born Israelis left than returned to Israel. The numbers, the absolute numbers aren't high. Again, we have millions of people in Israel. The question is, who are they? Okay. There was a slight decline, not as big as for the foreign-born, because many Israelis actually return to Israel to fight, even if they live abroad. But, and this is the big but, there are a whole bunch who left, native-born. In the judicial coup months, the first 9 months of 2023, a huge increase in the number who left. And then when the war is added in 2024, basically we're talking about 65% more than the average preceding the war. Now, we don't have clear numbers. We have anecdotes of who they are. We do know that they're relatively young, in their 20s and 30s, and apparently fairly educated and skilled. This is something that, again, if we get our country back on track, I assume they'll return. But that's what makes the next few years so critical. Okay, what do we need to do? We put together a 4-point program to try and explain to whoever would listen, basically, that it is possible to fix everything I just showed you, except that we're going to have to do some really big things that we've really been careful not to touch in the past. 4 points here that bridge between left-wing and right-wing, and we showed it to left-wing politicians and right-wing politicians, and I'll show you those guys in a moment who actually knows all of this and saw everything I just showed you here. The first point is, what do we do to move Israel back to a trajectory that brings us closer to the West, to the leading countries in the West? The most important thing is basically to overhaul our education system. We have basically, for those who are unfamiliar, 4 education systems in one: a Haredi, a religious, an Arab, and a secular Jew. We don't have 4 countries. We certainly don't have 4 economies. The things that these kids need to study are the same things, at least to work. I'm not saying that the religious need to be secular or vice versa, or Jews become Arabs and vice versa. But Jews and Arabs and Haredim and secular Jews have to work in the same economy. And we need physicians like Maimonides. We need engineers like the rabbi from the Lubavitcher rabbi. It's not anti-Haredi to study these things and become them, because everyone in Israel is going to need these guys afterwards. And so we have some of the best universities in the world. We don't have to import the knowledge from anywhere, but we have to basically increase the level of knowledge in that we're demanding from our kids. We have to upgrade the core curriculum, close down the current system of 4 streams, open a new one stream, one core. The rest can be different, have more religious studies, more arts, more sport, whatever reflects the nature and the character of the neighborhood and the town. But the core has to be the same core studies to work in a modern economy, to thrive in a modern economy, to have an opportunity in a modern economy, and also to learn what a liberal democracy is. We have a major problem today in Israel that many people are saying, but we won the elections. Why are you interfering? They don't have a clue about the difference between majority rule and tyranny of the majority. No clue at all. That's something that we have to teach in the schools, and it's got to be mandatory. And we have to develop the spine basically to do these kinds of things. So it's content, it's a core, and make it uniform and mandatory for all. Changing the way that teachers are chosen, the way that we teach we teach them, and the way we compensate them. I don't have time to go into that. And basically reform the entire system. You couldn't run a grocery store the way that basically the largest budget in Israel until the war, it surpassed defense, has been run. Now, why should anybody comply? Point number 2, money. We are at one of the we have the biggest opportunity we've ever had to actually make big changes, because no one needs an explanation today in Israel that we don't have enough money. We have to rebuild entire areas in the north, entire areas in the south, rebuild them. We have to rebuild the army, and we have to rebuild tens of thousands, if not 100 or more thousand Israelis' shattered lives. That's going to cost hundreds of billions of shekels that we do not have. Therefore, we are well within our ability to say to people after this next election, we don't have any money for sectoral purposes, only national ones. Not 1 shekel to a school that does not teach a full core curriculum. We're not funding lifestyles of non-work anymore. You guys need to get with the program, basically cold turkey, and this is our opportunity. This is it. What will safeguard it, what will make sure that the next government won't change everything, well, basically electoral reform. Cabinet ministers, for example, actually have an idea of what their ministry does. Separation of powers between the 3 branches of government, balance of power between them, and then nail this thing down in a constitution, basically, so that no one can change the system, at least for the next 20, 30 years. The whole point is that in 20, 30 years, the population in Israel will be such that they can change everything. They can change the electoral system. They can change the constitution. The whole point of points 3 and 4, is to ensure that number 1, the education, overhauling the education is done, and it's given time to work, so that in 20, 30 years, hopefully we will not have a generation grow up that will want to overturn everything that we've done and bring us back to the horrible 3 years that we've just encountered in Israel. That's on us. And to preempt some of the questions so who do we speak with? Who did we show this to? In the past year and a half, we basically showed it to anyone who's been willing to listen, from right to left. Naftali Bennett, more right-wing religious. Yair Lapid is more on the center-left side. Yair Golan is more on the left side. We just take the computer, sit down with them, show them the stuff. Benny Gantz, Avigdor Lieberman, every single one of the opposition leaders, the president of Israel, Gideon Sa'ar, who is now the foreign minister of Israel, Gadi Eisenkot, who is heading a party. We'll see where he's going in the future. All of these guys saw the same briefing that you just saw now and the same solutions. They all agreed to them, by the way, but they're not doing anything about them, which is why, in addition to showing the stuff in the Knesset, this is just last month, 2 separate occasions, we show everything. to all these guys who are in their face, Minister of Education, and so on, Mayor of Jerusalem. Since that's not enough, we're trying to go on a parallel route and reach anyone we can, be it in the regular media. We meet the editorial boards of leading Israeli media companies, and we are trying to develop a digital ability, basically, to improve our ability to reach unfiltered as many people as possible. Because again, like I began, this year we're going to have the most important elections in our history. And if we don't come together and fix this immediately after that election and know what we want to do, that opportunity will fade. Because right now, many, many people in Israel understand we cannot continue as we have. But that will dissipate if things quiet down, and quiet, it'll be very difficult to change things afterwards. So like I said at the beginning, I'm be happy to send the presentation to anyone who wants to see it. If there are people who you think should see this, we also come to Canada, we come to the States often. Happy to meet anyone who wants to see this. We need as many of the people who care about Israel deeply to see this stuff. Pressure whoever they know in Israel when politicians come and ask for money, knock heads together, tell them to work with the other guys. Ask them, what are you going to be doing about these big issues? And try to move the needle in that regard. So these are the things that I had to say.
Danny, thank you. Thank you so very much. And if you could send me your presentation, we can
Sure.
make it available to all those who registered who are interested.
Be happy to.
Thanks so much.
Sure.
And now I want to turn to my colleagues on the panel because I know they will have some questions to ask. I have a few questions that people have written in, but I'll hold back on those until we hear from members of our panel. Norm, please, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Your whole presence has to do with economic growth. And you talked a little bit about productivity, labor productivity, but you didn't talk about a bigger issue of total factor productivity, which I think many people don't know what I'm referring to. So you will, I hope, explain that to them. And but somehow education comes into productivity. All the social welfare programs come into productivity. So can you explain to us a little bit about the productivity and especially the total productivity using capital as well as labor, because that entire tech sector is in a universe by itself. And that productivity is astounding, as you showed us, twice the productivity of anybody else. So can you give us a little bit on that?
Sure. So just to explain to the non-economists in the audience, total factor productivity is the following. GDP per capita rises, or GDP rises more accurately. GDP rises because we have more people who work. It rises because we have more capital, but it rises beyond what workers and capital contribute. That extra bit is called what Norm called total factor productivity. And we know that in Israel, the primary determinant, it's like this intangible. It's the technology aspect. It's what's within us. We know in Israel, this was a study done several years ago by basically Israel's top economist, Elchanan Eltman, who's today at Harvard. He looked at what contributed to total factor productivity in Israel. And there are three main things. One is education, and it contributed about a third of the increase. In other words, we have more people, but as the people become more educated and know more stuff, they can do more things. So that's education. The second important thing that he found that determined total factor productivity is R&D, research and development. Domestic R&D was a big contributor. I don't remember. I think it was something like 40% of the increase in total factor productivity. And then it's R&D in our partner countries. In other words, when Canada invests in R&D and the US invests in R&D and European countries invest, the link is trade. We have to trade with these countries, which means that we have to adapt. We have to learn what you guys know in order to be able to trade with you and become efficient. So the contribution to knowledge improvement elsewhere through the filter of trade impacts our total factor productivity. And the bottom line is our total factor productivity until the 70s grew like crazy. And as we were catching up to the developed world, and it's plummeted to below 1% a year, basically growth since the mid 70s. I mean, it was like, I think 5% a year, something like that, prior to the mid 70s. And it just, well, we shifted in the 1970s. We changed our national priorities. We moved from country building to basically sectors building, and the money went elsewhere. And so just to give you a sense, I can actually show you that. I'll skip the graphs. This country, Israel, when in the late 40s, early 50s, when it was born, had basically an influx of people with only the clothes on their backs. They had to build roads, they had to build towns, and they somehow also built universities. So that by the mid 70s, we had 7 major universities on the ground. The number of research faculty in these universities per capita rose exponentially. The denominator population is rising exponentially. This rose even faster. And by the mid 70s, we had very close to American levels in terms of senior faculty per capita. Since the mid 70s, this fell by 60%. It's just in a free fall. Think of Matterhorn Mountain. We climbed it the first 25 years, free fall afterwards. If we look at healthcare, here too, we invested in hospitals, we invested in a whole host of areas. And so the number of hospital beds per capita remained relatively constant until 1977. Free fall since then, I think it fell by 40 or 50%. And today we have, I mean, it happened in other countries too, not that much, but other countries did it because they wanted to move people out of hospitals into other types of care, which are better. We, on the other hand, didn't really go in that route, so we have some of the most congested hospitals in the world today. Roads, you talked about productivity, total factor productivity. Well, if I have to move stuff from one point to the other, I need roads to be relatively free. And our congestion on the roads, the number of kilometers traveled per kilometer road in Israel, in 1970, it equaled the average for small European countries, Holland, Denmark, and so on. Today, we have 3.5 times their congestion, even though we have a third less vehicles per capita because they're really expensive. We just did not build the alternatives for roads. We're doing something about it today, but very, very late and very, very slowly. And so this literally, I mean, directly affects the productivity, because if I have a company that needs to move stuff from point A to point B, and if the roads are empty, I need 10 drivers and 10 trucks. But in our roads, they're so congested, I need twice as many drivers and twice as many trucks. The labor productivity of these drivers just fell by half, which means their wages are going to be half. So the wages are lower because of the congestion, but because we're inefficient, because the roads are congested, it drives up prices, which makes it even more difficult to sustain life here. So it's not just the human capital, it's the physical capital infrastructure that we've neglected in a big way. And the fact that we cater to interest groups in Israel and bring in hundreds of thousands of unskilled and uneducated workers from abroad, when Israel is inundated with unskilled and uneducated workers. When we bring these in, it just drops the wages to the floor, which reduces the incentive for private companies to invest in capital and in other things that would replace some of the workers and increase productivity. So that was the long answer to your short question, but
Yeah.
hopefully I
Thank
covered
you.
it.
Okay.
Thank you. John.
No, it was so impressive and a little bit depressing, but these are some of the things we've talked about before. The education system is so key, and teachers are paid relatively badly. And as you said, four curriculums instead of one core. It was frankly so comprehensive that I don't have a question. I definitely want to see the slides. I'm part of something called the London Initiative, which groups together about 360 Israelis and diaspora Jews, and they've identified three problems. One is a secure peace. The other is basically a civil society in Israel, and the other is democracy. But the civil society in Israel has identified the problems of civil society, have identified exactly what you have set out, very similar ways that it's really, in some ways, a lot of it comes down to education and of course funding for education, which means you can't continue to fund the Haredi sector in order to keep them politically on side or to defend the country, as you said. So thank you very much. I found it fascinating.
Mark, I see your hand, please.
Yes, Dan, thank you so much for your research and for your analysis, which sort of paints the picture in such a clear and methodical way for many of us who anecdotally always understood that these were some of the factors and phenomena occurring. And your last slide, of course, is a pivotal slide in terms of, as I was going to ask you, what are the policy options going forward? As I was listening to you, and your last slide answered my question. And for me, or from my perspective, it's all a question of political leadership and political visionary leadership, and having the right leaders making the right decisions. The fact that you have presented this to all of the opposition leaders and even some of the ministers within the current government and to the media and so on, and getting positive response from all of those sectors, and yet nobody is prepared to pull the lever and take the actions that you have rightly put forward. I know this may not be within the purview of Shorish, but my question would be, how hopeful are you and the team at Shorish that the future political leadership, even in the coming year, might be able to pull the lever?
I think that you diagnosed the problem correctly. I mean, they all agreed that these are the things they need to do, but we have it's called prisoner's dilemma in game theory, where they're looking two steps ahead. They're saying, well, if we're going to go into government, we're going to piss off so many people and do these things, and it's a lot of people. These are big things. Then who are we going to be able to form a government the day after? Nobody's going to want to talk with us. And so why would we want to do that? Let somebody else do it. Kick this can down the road. And that's been the rule ever since I began this trek in 1999. We have now reached a point where I think most people in Israel see the tip of the iceberg that I just showed you. They don't know the entire iceberg, but they understand just from what they see that we're heading right into it. And we have politicians that are basically arguing about, deck chairs on the Titanic. And instead of, hey, maybe you want to start working together to move this ship before we hit that iceberg. So that's why I included the electoral reform and the Constitution. That breaks your prisoner's dilemma, because what these guys are basically, all of the opposition leaders today in Israel span the entire political spectrum except for Haredim and Arabs. Okay. But I mean, they don't include them, although Mansour Abbas could easily be one of them, and he was in the previous government. I'm not going to go into the politics of it. The point is this. They all agree to these points because they span right wing, left wing, religious, and secular. But no one has the gumption to do it alone because they're afraid that the other guys are going to stab them in the back. And what we're trying to do is explain to them, this is it. We're never going to have this kind of an opportunity again. It's going to subside. If you guys win the election and blow it and don't do the big things and assume that you're going to be able to do them one day, you won't. I mean, think about it. I just showed you 26% of the toddlers are Haredim. They're there. They're in school tomorrow. Like, what's the plan here? How long are you going to keep saying we're going to have to talk with the Haredi leaderships? There's nobody to talk with. I mean, we've had the Russians, when they came to Israel, bought us 30 years of demography to get it right, to talk and to fix and so on. We didn't. And so this exponential function now reached a point where it's like the example of the bottle. You have a 1 liter bottle and you start with 1 milliliter and you double it each time, okay? After 10 periods, you still have just a half a milliliter. 10 more periods or 5 more periods, you have 16 milliliter. 5 more periods, half a bottle. That's where we are now, half the or almost half the bottle. 1 more period, the bottle explodes. We kind of kick this thing down to the point we don't have the luxury anymore of saying, would you guys be nice and play ball with us? I think the problem is not the Haredim. I should put that on the table. I don't think it's Haredim. I think it's their leaders and our leaders who enable their leaders to keep them in the dark and keep them basically prisoners so they don't have any opportunity to become physicians like the Rambam and so on. And that's the problem here. That's why we are trying now at Shoish to work on parallel tracks. We meet with the leaders. We meet not these are the political leaders. We meet with professional in the finance ministry and elsewhere. But we're trying to reach the public, and that the road to public opinion is vital here. We need, just like I said earlier, for anyone who sees an Israeli politician coming and asking, for support, these are the issues. What's your plan? How are you going to do? Why are you working with the other guy? Force them basically to work with the other guy. And if they come up before the election with a plan, that plan, for example, a constitution that Bennett and Yair Golan are happy with, that just spans right wing, left wing, religious, secular. Do it. Get it on the table. Come to the elections and don't try to just win for your party and hope that the bloc gets 61 votes. And so somebody's going to blackmail you immediately after the election. Like, we've been there. We know how that works. Try to increase your bloc. One of the things that I explained to them, I've been giving these talks just like I gave it to you. I've been giving it in Israel everywhere. And for example, a recent example, within the span of 1 week, a parlor talk at a Nobel laureate's house. He's on the left side, Dan Shechtman. And the same week at a yeshivat Hesder, a pre-military yeshiva in the settlements. They all want to see this stuff. This is a new area. So again, a long answer to your question. Am I optimistic? No. Do I have hope? Yes, because we have an opportunity here. And Israel has a history when our back is to the wall to get it right, to fix it at the highest possible price that could have been avoided, and yet we finally get it right in the end. This is different because when we understand in 25 years, when we have adults that can't support a first world country, it's too late to make them children and teach them what they need. We need to understand now that's where we're headed. We need to deal with this now. Will we do it in time? I don't know. There is a lot of pressure, and I think a lot of people are waiting. I spoke a little bit about immigration. I know that a lot of people are waiting to see what happens after the elections. And nothing is going to proceed linearly and not even exponentially. Something's going to give here. Something's got to explode at some point. And the question is, will we be able to do this in the direction that saves Israel, or are we going to lose it? But it's going to happen in the next few years. Either we fix this or we don't. I don't see an opportunity later.
Danny, before we go, I have 4 or 5 questions that are lining up, including from Rabbi K. But let me draw from one that's been written in, and it has to do, you talked about who you've been meeting with, and Linda Siegel has asked, have you been meeting with the Haredim, are they being brought into consultations about improving their education, for example? And I would add to that, what about the leaders of the private sector, the high-tech companies, the private financial institutions that deal with FDI and other things? Um, the those who balance or can affect the public budget because they have presence in a some form of a private sector market. So it's the Haredim in education and politics, and then my question about the private sector that's so robust.
Okay. So first of all, the Haredim, I just skipped one of the pictures here, but I could have shown you a picture. As we're non-political, a few years ago, many years ago, about a decade ago, Netanyahu, he was prime minister. He's like our only prime minister. He basically said if you exclude Haredim and Arabs, poverty and inequality among non-Haredi Jews would be very low. We don't have a problem. The problem is those guys. Now, there is a problem with those guys, but it's like, doing a dunk for an economist. Like we can separate out and see. And we separated out the Haredim and the Arabs, and we looked at, this is 10 years ago, poverty and inequality among non-Haredi Jews, and we found that if we had our own country of non-Haredi Jews, we would have one of the highest inequality rates in the developed world and one of the highest poverty rates. Shas really liked that, okay? And Deri invited me to show this to his entire Knesset contingent. This was my second time meeting Shas. I'll skip the story about the first time. But yeah, I showed them that, but I also showed them the rest about the education and everything. And we're sitting, the picture is, this was in the Knesset. They're all sitting around the table. And I'm showing them one slide after the other after the other. And they're like, how could that be? That can't be. It's not, it just can't be. And Deri was like sitting like 2 or 3 people away from me saying, it's education, it's education. But he built the system that I just showed you here, that basically destroyed their education. He knows it. And that's why there's no point in talking with these guys, the leaders, because they're cynical. They understand exactly what they're doing, and yet they continue with it. But I think that, like you saw, there are many Haredim that want to study higher education. Many Haredim, I believe, today actually want to go to the army and serve and feel embarrassed, maybe. The problem is not the Haredim. The problem is their leadership, who's not giving them an opportunity. You cannot break out very easily because you're entering out this world. It's like Columbus. You don't know what's out there. No preparation at all. Your family's going to be ostracized. Your brothers, your siblings won't be able to get married. Big problem here, and we're enabling that. So that's with regard to the Haredim. Yes, I've met them several times. Gidon Saar, when he was education minister, forced his deputy, who was a Haredi by the name of Porush, to meet, met. There's nobody to talk to, bottom line, in their leadership. As for the private sector, we do meet, but they're in a different place in the following sense. They're finally entered the scene, I mean, in terms of the protests and so on, but their focus is on the judicial coup issues and not on the underlying things. How did we even reach this point? How is it that we basically have that we reach this point? Let's put it that way. And this kind of results from the election that basically are driving right wing and left wing and Arabs together just to defend democracy in Israel. But they're focusing on the upper part, the democracy aspect, and not what's causing everything. I don't remember who it was before. I think John said the democracy group that you have like 3 different topics, right, that you're focusing on. But the real important one is the one determining each of these 3, and that's the education. And that should be the topic, in my opinion. And it somehow is missed by everyone in Israel, outside of Israel, and especially in the private sector. In fact, when you ask most Israelis, is there a problem with the education system? Everybody will say yes. What's the problem? The violence in the schools, the discipline. But that's a side effect of not having organization, not doing what you need to be doing. I mean, these the most important thing is your kids are not getting it with the education they need. And then they reach me at the university and they have no clue on what I'm talking about. And it's been declining. And I get the top of the top at Tel Aviv. Okay. And we turn out people that eventually get accepted to Harvard and Chicago and Stanford and Princeton. But when they enter us, the high schools are demanding less and less of them. And so we have to dumb down some of our introductory courses and lower our standards of acceptance just to get these guys in. That's the issue. That is determining everything. High tech doesn't understand it. They don't recognize that. They're on board with regard to the judicial coup. There's no big support. It's not a hot topic education, but that's what drove Israel to where we are today. That's what's going to determine if we save us in the future, I think.
Sam, Rabbi K.
Yes,
You have
thank
a
you,
question.
David.
And then John.
So this has been fascinating. I guess my big question for you, Professor Ben David, is we've seen in the last year the government be forced to bring the Haredim into the IDF. And there has been an utter lack of political will to enforce the law. So my question, I don't mean to have it be a cynical one, but it is a cynical one, is let's say that the Naftali Bennett wins this upcoming election and does what you're describing. He shows great political courage and sacrifices his future chances to be elected by doing this brave, great thing. How will it actually occur? Like, will it actually happen? Because we're seeing the failure of Israeli society to enact one element of we have a law, there is a law, we will follow the law, and the political will is not there to do it. You understand what you're
I
smiling. You know
understand.
exactly what I mean.
What's going to drive compliance is what you're
Yes,
talking about, basically. Money.
money.
Therefore, we have the money. Very easy.
Okay.
Okay. We don't have to start arresting everybody we see in the streets if they don't go to the army.
Mhm.
Okay. I mean, if they happen by and, if they ask for a driver's license and you check their credentials and they're not going to the army and they evaded the job, arrest them. But you don't go looking for them because there's too many of them. But deprive them of money for schools who don't teach what they need. Do not give them the benefits that nobody else in Israel gets for preschool and
Mhm.
for municipal taxes. When people do not have money, they need to start complying. They don't have a choice. It's very simple. And the best proof of that, you could see the immediate effect, for example, on fertility rates that Netanyahu himself caused. Completely indirectly. I mean, that wasn't his objective function.
Right.
But what he did by cutting the money basically forced them to start working, not at the rates we want to see, not in jobs we want to see. And of course, the moment the government could, they started piling the money back, so that kind of leveled off as well. But it works. We know it works. And it's the only thing that we can do. We can just not give anyone preferential treatment money. If you're sick, you go to the hospital. Everybody goes to the hospital, but we do not fund your schools. We do not fund your lifestyles. You can do whatever you want. You want to be a rabbi, you want to go to yeshiva, fine. My kids go to school, go to university, they pay for it. They pay tuition. These guys go to yeshiva, they get paid. Okay? Like what? This works. Trust
Yeah.
me. If the political wherewithal has to be in tackling point number 2, the money.
Mhm.
And this is, again, that's what I try to explain. We don't have money. So it's not, you don't even have to look like a mean person. I'm out to get these guys, okay? You're not. You don't have money. You really do need to rebuild entire sections of Israel. You can't spend it. We just don't have it, And by the way, also, if you notice that changing the entire school system is not anti-Haredi. And I told the politicians, do not make this anti-Haredi. This is about fixing the school system for everyone. The point is, do not leave them aside. No more
No more
systems,
two
4
tracks.
systems, okay?
Yeah.
but money is the one thing that will determine compliance. I don't know how to create a spine.
Mm.
No, no.
I
So
hear you.
public pressure is the only way to do it. We need serious leaders, and this is a serious leadership moment. And the question is, will they arise?
Yeah. Oh, thank you, sir.
This is too important and interesting a conversation to end right now. I know that both John and Norm have questions or comments, and anyone else in the panel? So let me invite John first and then Norm.
Okay.
Thanks. So Dan, when I was ambassador, I met with Stan Fisher, and he identified at the time, this is 2010, the two biggest challenges that he thought. And one of them was the Haredim. Unfortunately, he didn't mention education at the time, although it was always on the agenda. But the second thing that he was concerned about, and this goes to your question of how much money Israel has, was the amount of money that Israel was spending in the West Bank in order to essentially protect and defend what was then about 250,000 settlers, and which is now many, many more. I don't know, your work doesn't, what you've talked about doesn't focus on that, but is that a major concern of yours? Is that a major drain? Obviously, defending the country is huge, but query whether defending what's going on in the West Bank is a key priority, etc.
One of the things that enables us to meet right wing and left wing is to try and remain apolitical. So I have my own views on that, and very strong ones, which you might even be able to guess. But I mentioned what I mentioned in a roundabout way. Our money needs to go right now, because we don't have any. It needs to go to national issues, not sectoral ones. What you mentioned is a sectoral issue, okay? We cannot keep funding things that only interest a small group of people. Obviously, that has huge political and diplomatic ramifications as well. But the point is, again, I'm trying to walk a fine line here, but we need to right now focus on the big picture. The big picture is within Israel. It has to be. There are entire sections of Israel that are depopulated and destroyed, and we need to fix them. And that means first focus on Israel, on internal Israel. And it's really easy to explain to people. They won't
Thank you.
accept it necessarily, but it's easy to explain.
Okay, thanks very much. I understand where you're coming from and what your limitations are.
Yeah. Norm. No, you're on mute. You're on mute, Norm.
Still mute.
Norm, you're on mute.
Yeah. Speaking of money, the budget was just passed last week, I think, and budgets tell you everything about a country's priorities. So could you comment on the budget as to some of the issues that you raised, because there's education, health throughout the whole budget. So if you have some sense of what that budget means for your ideas.
First of all, the budget wasn't passed. The
Oh, it was
cabinet.
proposed, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, but what you just said is a huge issue, because it's not clear that they will be able to pass it, and that may be one of the reasons we go to elections early. They need to pass the budget before the end of March.
Yes,
And if
that's
they
right.
don't pass the
I
budget
thought it
before the end of
was. I
March-
thought it was approved, maybe in
No,
committee only.
Far from
Yeah.
it. The Haredim they're living in a different world. They're still trying to force the government to basically pass a draft evasion law right now, before they are willing to support the budget. And Bibi was probably the best politician we have in Israel. I'm just talking in terms of his abilities. He's picking them apart, and he's giving them jobs so that they won't defeat his budget. But it definitely was not passed, and he wants it to be passed. So it's not there yet. The budget itself is a huge problem. First of all, and this didn't start with this government. Traditionally, our budget is very, very non-transparent, and purposefully so, because of the fractured type of government we have. Every coalition demands its piece of meat, that from the budget, and to the extent that it's hidden well, then less of an outcry over these things. And so I did, for example, a study on this about 20 some years ago. Several of my students are in the budget department in the finance ministry at the time. And what we did was work under the radar of the finance ministry and said, look, you have thousands and thousands of budget items. So ostensibly, everything is clear. But what's written there doesn't mean that the money's actually, we know where it's going, okay, who's getting it and why. And what we did was we basically proved it. We asked the guys who work in the budget office at the lowest levels, the ones who actually work with, each one has his own budget items that he needs. They know exactly who's getting the money. And so what we did was clandestinely, we kind of worked with them. And then I went to the head of the budget office. I said, look, do you know this? I said, sure. Well, why don't you put it like in a normal Excel file with normal item names, so that anyone can sort it any way they want. So John asked how much we're spending or talked about the settlements. We don't know how much we're spending on that. We don't know how much the Haredim are costing. No clue. No clue. So first things first is when you want to change budget priorities, first of all, you have to understand what they are and fix the mess. And since that information is there at the very micro level within the budget office, all they need to do is collect that information from their own people, put it in an Excel file, put it on the internet. And see, the reason that they didn't do this for many years, the professionals didn't want to do it as well, not just the politicians, because every time budget season would come around, anytime the politicians would see, oh, there's money lying around, give it to me. And they want more money and so on. And so they basically, the professional economists tried to keep it hidden. Right now, the politicians are controlling everything. They're controlling everything. Smotrich is even giving them demands to further obfuscate, just to hide what's in these items, just so that nobody will be able to understand.
Is it your view that it won't be passed in March, that they won't
I
get
have no idea. There are many theories abound. I'm not a political strategist. No idea. Right now, it looks bad, but on the other hand, Netanyahu's a magician, and he's already started to pick apart the opposition within the Haredim and just give them jobs. He just made today one of there are
If it's
four Haredim.
yeah, if it's not passed, it's an automatic election. Is that right?
Yeah, but within 3 months.
Yeah.
So that
Okay.
means that by the end of June, we have to have elections.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Danny, you've given us a wonderful graduate seminar. It's terrific. Thank you
My pleasure. Thanks for
very,
having
very,
me.
very much. It was really, you brought a lot of new information and in particular some new insights and an analysis. I understand your sense of having to walk that fine line and not get drawn into politics. On the other hand, if I could push you in that direction, I would, since that's my interest. And I know that many of the decisions and the choices that you're saying that leaders have to make are political ones. They're cost benefit.
These are all political
Right.
choices.
They're
Yeah.
transactional. They're both short term and long term. And as you noted, the issue of liberal democracy in your opening comments is just so vital. And to make that function, you need not just electoral reform, but you have to have transparency so you can have informed participation. So thank you for this, and I hope we can call on you again,
Pleasure.
perhaps to reflect in some time from now about how things by then will have improved, and that you see
Hopefully.
opportunities
Inshallah.
opening up. But with that, let me invite Rabbi Kay on behalf of Holy Blossom that sponsors the Israel Dialogues and has been doing so now for over 4 years to say have the last word.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you so much, Dr. Ben David. Thank you to our entire panel. It's a fascinating subject, and as always, uh, this is a perfect example of the kind of thing that you don't know exactly what you're stepping into when you log into the Israel Dialogues, but the time goes quickly, and you find yourself really having investigated something really fascinating and a new perspective and a new idea about what is going on in Israel today. I'm going to briefly plug that this coming Sunday, we are hosting at the synagogue Dr. David Barak Gordetsky from the University of Haifa, who is an expert in anti-Semitism and artificial intelligence technologies. And starting at 11 a.m., he'll be giving a lecture, which is both in person and online, about the crossover between AI and anti-Semitism. So if you were excited to learn here, my assumption is that you'll be excited to continue learning. And we will see you, I hope, on Sunday. And if not on Sunday, you will get an email from us in the near future with more dates for the Israel Dialogues. The entire schedule was sent out with your registration link. And we have an entire schedule on the website complete with bios for all of the guests that we currently have scheduled coming through the end of April. So with great thanks to our panelists and with great thanks to our Israel committee and to you, Dr. Ben David, we really appreciate your brilliant and really insightful presentation today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay warm. Don't go outside if you don't have to. If you're here in Toronto, enjoy the snow day, and we will see you shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you.